Is it just me, or did the summer I turned pretty just rip our hearts out and leave us speechless? Because episode 6 wasn't just emotional, it felt like the final nail in the coffin for Conrad and Belly. And yet there's this small, lingering hope that maybe, just maybe, this isn't the end. But if it is, then we just witnessed Conrad's final goodbye. And let's be real, the look in his eyes said everything. This wasn't just another episode. This was the episode where everything changed. The wedding is days away, the truth is bubbling under the surface, and Belly, she's finally starting to see things clearly, maybe too late. Because as Conrad prepares to open up one last time, Belly is staring down the reality of who Jeremiah really is. So the question now is, are we hearing wedding bells or warning bells? Episode 6 didn't just pick up where we left. Off it slammed us into Conrad's world like a tidal wave. And honestly, seeing everything from his perspective changed everything. We've always known Conrad carries the weight of the world on his shoulders, but this episode stripped away his quiet facade and gave us raw vulnerability. The episode opens with him alone again thinking, replaying old memories, torturing himself with what-ifs for the first time. We're not just watching him suffer, we're feeling it. Every look he gives Belly, every hesitation, every breath he holds, it all comes from this place of aching restraint. And it's not because he doesn't love her. It's because he loves her too much. That's what makes it hurt. Because this entire time, Conrad has been convincing himself that letting Belly go is the right thing to do. For Jeremiah, for Susanna's memory, for peace. But what about his peace? What about Belly's? And if we go back to what we saw in episode 5, it becomes clear that Conrad never truly stopped loving her. Not for a second. He just buried it deep under guilt and responsibility, pretending it didn't matter because it was easier than dealing with the mess it would cause. But in episode 6, that mask starts to crack. There's a moment, small but powerful, where he nearly says everything. And you can tell he's debating whether this is his last chance. His last shot to finally be honest. And just when we think he's about to do it, reality pulls him back. Because guess what? Taylor's watching. And Taylor isn't here to play nice. She knows Conrad's history. She remembers the pain he caused, and she's not going to let him walk back into Belly's life with more confusion and emotional chaos. The way she confronts him, it's brutal. She throws his past right in his face, the broken promises, the mixed signals, the silence when Belly needed him most. And as much as we want to defend him, she's not wrong. But that's the tragedy of it, isn't it? Conrad isn't a villain. He's just a broken boy trying to do the right thing, even if it destroys him in the process. He keeps telling himself he doesn't deserve Belly, that Jeremiah does. And by doing that, he's not just giving up on her, he's giving up on himself. But what he doesn't realize is that Belly is starting to open her eyes too. Not because of Conrad's words, because of Jeremiah's actions. And that changes everything. Because while Conrad is battling guilt in silence, Jeremiah is revealing a side of himself that Belly hasn't seen before. A side that looks a lot like his father, and not in a good way. From the flashy wedding plans to the obsession with business deals, Jeremiah is turning what's supposed to be Belly's happiest moment into a networking opportunity. And the worst part, he genuinely thinks he's doing something great. He can't see that Belly doesn't want expensive clubs or guest lists full of business associates. She wants intimacy, authenticity, love. And slowly but surely, she's realizing that maybe, just maybe, she's marrying a stranger. And here's where the suspense creeps in. Because while Belly and Jeremiah are charging toward the altar, Conrad is standing in the shadows with a heart full of unsaid words. Taylor's confrontation leaves him shattered, but not defeated. Not yet. Because deep down he knows he can't live with himself if he doesn't at least try. And maybe that's what breaks us the most. Watching someone who has spent seasons pushing his feelings down finally reach his breaking point, knowing he's too late, knowing Belly may already be gone. But hoping anyway, because hope, it's the one thing Conrad has never truly let go of. Asterisk. There's a moment in every story when the main character begins to see the truth. Not the version they wanted to believe, but the reality they've been too afraid to face. And in episode 6, that moment hits Belly like a tidal wave. At first, it's subtle, just a look, a silence, a hesitation. But then it snowballs. One small red flag becomes another, and suddenly Belly is standing in the middle of a storm she didn't see coming. Because Jeremiah, the boy who was supposed to be her safe choice, the one who promised stability, comfort, and clarity, he's not who she thought he was. We've seen glimpses of this before, especially during the internship storyline, but now it's undeniable Jeremiah is changing. Or maybe he was always this person, and Belly just didn't want to see it. From his dismissive attitude about the cost of the wedding to the way he uses Mr. Fisher's offer as some kind of gift, it's clear he's focused on the wedding as a performance. Not a promise, not a partnership, but a spectacle. And Belly. She's starting to feel like she's playing a role in someone else's show. And it's not just the money, it's everything. The way Jeremiah talks about inviting business associates to the wedding, the way he shrugs off Belly's concerns about her future, the way he assumes she'll just go along with whatever he wants. None of this feels like love, it feels like pressure, like control. Like she's being swept up in something that no longer reflects who she is or what she needs. And for the first time, Belly isn't ignoring those warning bells. She's listening. Because deep down, there's still a part of her that's connected to cousins, to the beach, to her memories with Conrad. And those feelings, those unfinished moments, they're clawing their way back to the surface. She's haunted by what Conrad said and what he didn't say. And maybe it's unfair. Maybe it's complicated. But real love always is. And here's the thing, Belly has been through too much to keep pretending. She's lost Susanna. She's watched her relationships fall apart and rebuild over and over. She's learned the hard way that love isn't about fairy tales or summer magic, it's about choices. And in this episode, we see her standing on the edge of the biggest choice she's ever had to make. She can move forward with Jeremiah, accept the ring, the wedding, the life that's been laid out for her like a business deal, or she can turn around, face the chaos, face the pain, face Conrad, and no matter how far she's come with Jeremiah, no matter how many times she's tried to convince herself that this is what she wants, something inside her is pulling her back. But it's not just love that's making her question everything. It's identity. Because Belly is starting to realize that the girl who used to wait for letters from Conrad, who used to sit on the beach dreaming of a forever with him, that girl still exists. And she's not ready to be silenced. Not by guilt. Not by expectation. Not even by Jeremiah's perfect smile. And that's where the episode hits hardest. Not in the drama, not in the conflict, but in the quiet moments where Belly sits with her thoughts and realizes she doesn't recognize her own life anymore. And isn't that the scariest feeling of all? To look around and not know how you got there. To be standing in a beautiful dress next to a boy who swears he loves you and still feel completely alone. And while all of this is happening, Conrad is still lingering on the edges, still holding back, still hoping for a moment that might never come. But that's the tragedy of episode 6. Conrad isn't the one pushing Belly away anymore. She's drifting on her own. She's coming to her own conclusions. Because when someone shows you who they really are, eventually you have to believe them. And Jeremiah, he's showing her more than he realizes. Every word, every choice, every casual disregard for her feelings, it's all adding up. And Belly is starting to ask the question that could change everything. Is this what I really want? And as we head toward the final stretch, the tension is unbearable. Because now, it's not just about who Belly loves. It's about who she is, who she's becoming, and whether she's brave enough to rewrite the story that everyone else has written for her. We know what Conrad wants. We know what Jeremiah expects. But what does Belly want? That's the question episode 6 dares her to answer. And by the end of it, we're all holding our breath. Because if she chooses to listen to that voice inside her, the one that's been growing louder with every lie and every silence, then the wedding may never happen. And if it does, it might just be the biggest mistake of her life. As the emotional weight of episode 6 intensifies, all eyes quietly shift back to Conrad because whether anyone wants to admit it or not, he's the center of the storm. And this time, he knows it. For most of the season, Conrad has tried to keep his distance. He's buried himself in silence, in sacrifice, in the idea that letting Belly go is the best way to protect everyone. But protection comes with a price. And now, Conrad is finally starting to break under the weight of everything he's lost. Belly, his sense of peace, and even his own identity. And so, with all the guilt and regret boiling over, he makes a decision that feels like a quiet act of rebellion. He's going to tell her the truth, all of it. Not for a second chance. Not to sabotage the wedding. But because he simply can't live with himself if he doesn't. It's not a big dramatic move. It's quiet, thoughtful, painful. He packs his bags and heads back to Cousin's Knot. As a boy chasing love, but as a man facing his own past. And when he arrives, everything feels different. The beach doesn't feel like home anymore. The house is filled with tension. The wedding plans are in full swing, but no one seems truly happy. Least of all, Belly. And Conrad sees it instantly. It's in the way she talks, the way she hesitates, the way her eyes search the room for something that isn't there. And maybe, just maybe, that gives him the tiniest flicker of hope. Because as much as he wants to believe he's too late, there's a part of him that senses she's not sure either. That she's waiting maybe not for him, but for something. Real, something honest. But just when he thinks he might have a chance to speak his truth, the door slams shut. Taylor. And this time, she's not pulling any punches. She confronts him hard. And the way she looks at him like he's the villain in a story he never meant to write, almost destroys him. Taylor reminds him of everything he's done wrong. The heartbreak, the confusion, the years of emotional whiplash Belly endured because of his silence. And what hits the hardest is that Taylor isn't exaggerating. She's just telling the truth. Conrad let Belly down more times than he can count. And no matter how noble his reasons were, the pain still lingers. So when Taylor says it's too late, that he doesn't get to walk in and change the story at the last second, Conrad listens. He doesn't argue, he doesn't fight. Because for once, he thinks maybe she's right. And yet, there's still something inside him that refuses to walk away completely. Not yet. Because this isn't about winning. It's not about competing with Jeremiah. It's about clarity. Conrad has spent the entire series living in shadows, hiding behind responsibility, fear, and guilt. But now he wants Belly to know the truth, not to confuse her, not to pull her away from Jeremiah, but because she deserves to know. She deserves honesty, even if it's too late, even if it changes nothing, even if it hurts. And that's where Conrad becomes more than just the sad boy with a heavy heart. He becomes real. Flawed, but real. And for the first time, he's choosing vulnerability over silence, emotion over duty. So now we find ourselves in a dangerous emotional limbo. Conrad knows what he wants to say. He's standing on the edge of everything he's never dared to speak aloud. And Belly, she's spiraling in her own silent crisis, caught between the version of love she's tried to create with Jeremiah and the messy, unfinished, painful love that still lives in her memories of Conrad. And while Taylor's words echo loud in Conrad's head, his heart is still louder. He's going to try just one last time. Not because he thinks he'll win, but because the truth matters. Because she matters. And when someone has meant as much to you as Belly has to Conrad, you don't leave anything unsaid. But even as he prepares to speak, there's one terrifying reality hanging over everything. What if Belly's already made up her mind? What if the girl he fell in love with is gone? What if this really is the final goodbye? Conrad doesn't have the answers. But what he does have is the courage to finally stop running. And that alone feels like a quiet kind of victory. Because whether or not Belly chooses him, Conrad is finally choosing himself. His truth, his heart. And that might be the most important choice of all, by the time episode 6 reaches its final act. There's a heavy silence hanging over everything, one that feels louder than any argument, more painful than any heartbreak. It's the silence that comes when a decision has already been made, but no one has spoken it out loud. And that's exactly where Belly finds herself. Surrounded by people who are preparing for a wedding, but inside, she's falling apart. The doubts are no longer whispers in the back of her mind, they're screams. And while everyone around her is busy with tuxedo fittings, rehearsals, and picture-perfect smiles, Belly is starting to see the truth so clearly it terrifies her. She doesn't want to marry Jeremiah. Not like this. Not when her heart is still carrying Conrad's name. Not when she knows deep down that she's been compromising herself for a version of love that doesn't feel true anymore. But here's the twist that no one saw coming. Belly isn't the only one who's spiraling. Jeremiah senses something too. He may not be as emotionally intuitive as Conrad, but he's not blind. He sees the way Belly pauses before answering. He notices how distant she's been, how forced her smile feels, and suddenly all his confidence begins to unravel. The boy who was so sure he had finally won now feels the ground shifting beneath him. And this is where the final emotional blow lands, not in a fight, not in a grand gesture, but in a quiet, devastating realization on all sides. This wedding is a lie. Not because there's no love, but because there's too much pain, too much history, too much left unsaid. And then just as everything feels like it might implode, appears, not with a speech, not with drama, but with honesty. Pure, painful, honest truth. He doesn't beg. He doesn't plead. He simply tells Belly what he should have said a long time ago. That he never stopped loving her. That letting her go was the hardest thing he's ever done. That watching her get ready to marry his brother is tearing him apart. And for the first time, Belly is allowed to breathe, to feel, to stop pretending. Because even if it's too late, even if nothing changes, she needed to hear it. We needed to hear it. And this is the moment that breaks everything. Not because Conrad's confession ruins the wedding, but because it exposes what the wedding was always missing. The truth. Belly finally sees herself not as someone caught between two brothers, but as someone who's been carrying the weight of everyone else's expectations for too long. And with Conrad's words still echoing in her chest, she faces the mirror and doesn't recognize the girl in the white dress. Not because she isn't beautiful, but because she isn't her. And that's the final crack that shatters everything. So, where does that leave us? Not with a perfect ending, not with clear answers, but with something far more powerful. Choice. Belly is finally standing at the crossroads. One path leads to comfort, safety, and a future already mapped out. The other, it's uncertain, it's terrifying, but it's hers. And that's the power of episode 6. It's not just about love. It's about reclaiming agency. About asking yourself who you are when the world stops spinning, and whether you have the courage to walk away from something that looks right, but feels wrong. This wasn't just Conrad's final goodbye. It was Belly's awakening. The moment she stopped being the girl torn between two brothers and started becoming the woman who decides for herself, whether she runs from the altar or walks toward it, whether she chooses Jeremiah, Conrad, or no one at all. The point is, she gets to choose. And that's what makes this episode unforgettable. Not the heartbreak, not the suspense, but the truth. The raw, painful, beautiful truth. Belly deserves better, and now, finally, she knows it.